This season of What's Her Name is sponsored by the Women's History Initiative at the Utah Historical Society. Utah women's history is so much more than you think. history.utah.gov/women.
This episode is also brought to you by our Patreon supporters: Courtney Boyce, Robin Brown, Carrie Gilbride, Amanda Gilmore, Maria Carla Sanchez, Valerie Jacobson, Heather McKinnon, Jill Harrigan, Monique Harris-Pixato, Sarah Mikado, Michaela Frew, Lindsay Cummings, Bree Smith, Robin Brown, and Heather Justin. You can become a supporter on our website and help us make new episodes of the podcast for as little as $1 a month. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Olivia.
Today I want to tell you about one of the most powerfully influential, crucially important, visionary, relentlessly determined figures in 20th century Black America.
Wow.
She was central to the movements for Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, community care. She was a wealthy, powerful, socially privileged and important Black elite in Creole society who would become the foremost Black nationalist of the 20th century, lead the call for reparations and a return to Africa, and eventually lead a coalition of Black Americans to declare independence from the United States, secede from the nation, and declare a new nation, the Republic of New Africa, within the borders of the United States.
Wow.
And somehow, we've never heard of her.
I've never heard of her. Whoa.
This is an incredible and incredibly complicated story, and I've been waiting a very long time to tell it to you.
All right.
So I'm very excited that we can now introduce Queen Mother Audley Moore. I'm Olivia Mickle.
And I'm Katie Nelson.
And this is What's Her Name?
Fascinating women you've never heard of.
For my guest this episode, we have Dr. Ashley Farmer, returning from our long ago episode on May Mallory.
Yeah.
My name is Ashley Farmer. I'm an associate professor of history and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and I study Black women's radical politics and intellect.
Author of the brand new book, Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. This is the first biography ever written of Audley Moore.
Wow.
Which is
surprising.
Astounding on so many levels.
Huh.
So when I was writing my first book, Remaking Black Power, I interviewed probably 40 women who were activists in the 60s and 70s. And almost every single person talked about Queen Mother Moore or Audley Moore. They mentioned her as somebody who they had seen speak, as somebody who had taught them kind of like the science around organizing, as somebody that had introduced them to the concept of reparations, which is a key kind of cornerstone of her activism. And I was fascinated by hearing about this across different affiliations, ages, men and women. But there was almost nothing about her. A few things mentioned here, a few things mentioned there. But I couldn't find a scholarly article about her. I could barely find a blog post about her, let alone a book about somebody who was so essential to, important to this period in history.
How has this woman done all this work and she's undiscoverable?
Did she get intentionally removed from the story by an arch nemesis?
It doesn't appear so.
Interesting. Okay. Did she wish to be forgotten?
Very much no.
Huh. Did she have the wrong fashion, skin color, hairstyle, accent? Oh, was she too rich?
No, 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 and no.
Oh.
There is nothing about her because there is no archive.
Oh, an archive, of course. Of course.
But that is very confusing because one thing we know for sure is that Audley Moore assiduously archived her own life. She knew that these movements are going to matter, and she very carefully kept everything. She knows this is going to be important. She knows.
Okay, so she didn't have the one champion. Right after they die, someone writes the biography, and then they're famous. But nobody wrote the biography. Is that it?
No.
Oh.
All of our narratives are wrong for this one.
Interesting.
The answer is because there was no archive.
What?
Where did it go?
Where did it go?
We don't know.
What on
we
earth?
Don't know where the archive went.
So Audley Moore was born in 1898. She died in 1997, so almost the entirety of the 20th century that she lived. And she was kind of her own archivist because she understood her importance. But as I talk about in the book in the introduction, nobody really knows where all that stuff went. There's literally pictures of her among her archives, among her artifacts, and there's great stories about what could have happened there. Some people told me it was stolen. Some people claimed to be wearing some of the stuff when I went to interview and speak with them. Some people told me that it was like buried in her hometown of New Iberia.
Literally buried?
Literally buried.
Wow.
So it really was, it was kind of some national treasure stuff going on here, trying to hunt it down. So it was more than a notion to try to write the history of somebody that lived 100 years when you don't kind of have that cradle to grave assessment of their document. She was also somebody that only had a third grade education. So she was somebody who I would describe as thinking in motion constantly, sometimes just scribbling stuff down on the way to a protest, giving a talk extemporaneously. And so we don't quite account for that in our archival reckonings the same way. And certainly not for women. And then certainly not for Black women on top of it, right? So I realized why it was so difficult to kind of piece her life together. So this has really been a labor of love over the better part of a decade, slowly researching other things and doing other projects and coming upon something of hers and kind of pocketing it in order to tell her story. So Audley Moore was born in 1898 in New Iberia, Louisiana, which is about 2 hours outside of New Orleans. And she's the daughter of a former slave and a free woman of color who end up being what we would maybe call like the Creole class or an upper Black class in New Iberia.
This is one of the few places in the U.S. where people of color have a fair amount of social standing and political and economic power. Louisiana is retaining the sort of highly complicated and nuanced views of race from its French territory days versus much of the one drop views of the rest of the South. But also, her father was born into slavery. Her grandfather had been lynched when her mother was a child.
Oh.
So she is not that far removed from slavery.
And then they moved to New Orleans. And one of my favorite lines she has, she says that she was basically being trained to be a bourgeois little stinker. Because her dad owned his own business, he owned land. Her mother had been free for several generations. So they were able to buy a house in New Orleans. She had 2 younger sisters as well. Her mother didn't work. They were among kind of the Black elite in New Orleans.
She has a maid. She has the fanciest clothes. She goes to a very posh Catholic school.
So it's a really interesting story about how somebody like that becomes basically the foremost Black nationalist of the 20th century. And it really is a little bit of happenstance. Her mother dies when she is about 5 or 6 years old. and her father dies when she is 19.
Her world turns upside down. Her father also has quite a few previous children from previous marriages, and pretty much all of his estate goes to those older half-siblings.
And she's the oldest of these two other sisters. And so now she's living and working in New Orleans, trying to keep a roof over their head. She's basically taken up work as a domestic worker, the only job really available to Black women at this time. So she's scrubbing floors every day to try to make ends meet. A far cry from the life she had before. And it's in New Orleans that she marries a Jamaican man who was familiar with Marcus Garvey, the biggest Black nationalist the world's ever seen. And Garvey came to New Orleans, kind of a Black nationalist stronghold, in the summer of 1922.
Marcus Garvey, of course, really influential political activist who is going on speaking tours around the southern U.S. and introducing a lot of really new, really radical, really exciting ideas.
And I love telling the story that she tells about how she met Garvey, because I think it kind of really encapsulates how one moment can really shift your entire life. So I want you to imagine that there's this kind of 2-story wooden building that has kind of colorful shutters. It's called the Longshoremen's Hall. It's the place where the union workers work, but also just a meeting house for working class Black folks. And she's walking up in the July heat, and she is trudging slowly because she claims she's got a gun in her bra, she's got a gun in her pocketbook, and her husband has a briefcase full of bullets. They're going to hear Marcus Garvey speak. And as she's walking up to this place, everybody's like, he'll speak tonight. I'm telling you, he's going to speak tonight. Because what had happened was Marcus Garvey had come to town the previous day, and the police had tried to bar him from speaking. So the word on the street was that his local United Negro Improvement Association had cleared it up, and he was going to give this big speech tonight. So she goes and she sits in with her bullets and her gun and all of her places. And she says that Garvey comes bounding down the hall, and he says, "My friends, I'm so sorry I wasn't able to speak to you last night, but the chief of police was a stooge and tried to run me in." Then the police come into the Longshoremen's Hall and basically threaten to arrest him again. And at that point, the Black folks of New Orleans stand up on the benches. She pulls out her 2 guns, and they yell in unison, "Speak, Garvey, speak. Speak, Garvey, speak." And she says that the police realized that they were outnumbered and that these people were ready to fight. And they filed out of there, lobster red, with their tails between their legs. And she sits down and she hears this speech about how she's descended from African kings and queens, how it is beautiful to be Black, how you need to be self-sufficient, how we need to stop relying on white folks, how we can build economic, political, social power without integration. And this transforms her life as somebody who really saw how great life could be and how horrible life could be in a matter of a year or two, right? Sliding up and down that class scale. So she becomes a nationalist then and there, and a dyed-in-the-wool Garveyite. But she is not able to kind of sustain that relationship in New Orleans because they want to move. It's the Great Migration. They want to get out of New Orleans. They traveled to California, to Chicago. They land in Harlem, thinking they can kind of reconnect with this community there. But by that time, Garvey has been deported. And so she's working, living, and she hears about the Communist Party. The Communist Party at this particular time was courting Black folks in 2 key ways. First, just every day doing the stuff for Black folks. When they got kicked out because they couldn't pay the rent, they would take their furniture and put it back in. When they were getting price gouged, where meat was something for white folks and something for Black folks, they'd go in and make sure that they could get enough to eat. They advocated for Black working rights. And also, they advocated for the idea that Black people were a separate nation and could secede from the United States and form their own nation in the southeastern United States, where most of us had been enslaved. Now, most people knew that that was not, in fact, going to happen. But as she says, they were working every day for Black people, and they were talking and using kind of the same language of Garveyism and Black nationalism. She thought it was a good vehicle. That's her exact words, a vehicle to get in to help her people.
Wow. So does she know Claudia Jones, the journalist?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes. She knew Claudia Jones very well. In fact, she is the one who got Claudia Jones out of jail.
Oh.
Claudia Jones and her worked together for many years. Claudia was a significant amount younger than her. But they organized together in the Upper Harlem branch of the Communist Party for many years, and they were great friends. In fact, when Claudia was arrested, Audley Moore was the head of the Save Claudia Jones Committee. And he organized a group in Harlem, but also, again, another moment of her kind of building coalitions, organized women across the 5 boroughs of Manhattan to organize for her release. She saw what they were doing to Claudia as a form of political repression that was going to come for us all if we did not stand up for her.
And in fact, if you ask that question about pretty much anyone involved in any aspect of Black rights, Black life, Black culture, at any point in the 20th century in the United States, Audley Moore knew them. She knew Rosa Parks. She knew Jesse Jackson. She knew Marcus Garvey, obviously. She was very close with Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela. And Malcolm X used to come to her house.
Fascinating.
She knew everyone.
She also organized a lot with May Mallory. They were both members of the Republic of New Africa together. They appeared in many marches, protests, anything and everything happening in Harlem. They were often side by side as well. So she sees everybody. Every major kind of Black woman figure, she probably has at least a direct, if not 1 degree of separation from. She worked for the Communist Party for many years until from about the 1930s to the 1950s. And after that, she returned back home and kind of reinvested in Black nationalist dreams, both in New Orleans and in New York.
She is an immensely practical activist. She is not a sort of single-minded ideological warrior. She is a pragmatic fighter. She has specific goals that she wants to achieve, and anything that is going to help her work toward achieving those goals, anything and anyone that she believes might help forward those things, she's going to work with you.
From there, she kind of proliferated the idea of this Black nation to a new generation of folks in the 50s and 60s, including Malcolm X, who used to come visit her, Black Panthers, anybody you name. She was kind of seen by that point as somebody who understood Black nationalism, but also the real science of organizing from her years in the Communist Party. And she helped kind of develop many different formulations of Black nationalism on the way up until her last public appearance, which was the Million Man March in 1987. And I think one of the things that is an interesting thing about her is because she saw how easily it could be taken away, she said it was never really ours in the first place.
You can have everything. You can be elite, privileged, socially important, and it can disappear in an instant. None of this will ever be guaranteed. It doesn't matter how much progress you might feel like you're making in this system. It can always be disappeared again.
And as she evolved as a thinker over the years, she came to reckon with the idea of whether or not Black people should truly even consider themselves American, and whether America, as in the nation state, was ever going to conceive of us that way. And by later in her life, she had an analysis where she said, when we were freed after slavery, we were never really asked if we wanted to be Americans or if we wanted to go back to Africa. And she understood why that may not be feasible by the late 20th century to do. But she asked a lot of Black people to think about, like, what is at stake in continuing to believe that you are American? On the one hand, certainly we've contributed to this country and we have a right to be here. But on the other hand, has this whole history not shown you that it's never really going to happen? In other words, this might be a failed experiment for you. So if it's a failed experiment for you, let's talk about what other formulations can take place. And that starts with you kind of letting go of your idea of Americanness and reorienting yourself towards Africa. And certainly there were times when it got into kind of the essentialist, mythical vision of Africa. But as she grew, she learned to let go of that and find a more tangible connection. Think about what it is that you want to do and how you want to position yourself to the nation state. And most importantly, do you want to continue to fight for a seat at the table at a place that clearly does not want you, right? And I think that there was a moment in the 60s and 70s where some people, particularly after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and everyday life for Black people wasn't that much better, could understand that. And that's kind of how we get to Black power. But I think it's something that perhaps people are circling back around on again. We see that cycle of kind of the 2020 moment, all of this stuff come, and yeah, we're not there. And if not, we're going back more virulently than we were previously. And so I think that kind of question of reckoning with what is your relationship to the nation state? Is this a project you want to continue to engage in? And what other futures do you want to imagine for yourself? Whether or not you're going to get on board with seceding from the nation, I think it's an interesting thought project that disabuses us from our investment in some of these national myths. No matter your relationship to the nation state, it's a useful thing to think through, right? And so I think that's a really valuable lesson that she offered there.
This season of What's Her Name is sponsored by the Utah Women's History Initiative at the Utah Historical Society.
The Women's History Initiative highlights Utah's dynamic history makers. 8 sovereign nations in Utah since time immemorial, pioneers, explorers, immigrants, entrepreneurs, visionaries, and dreamers who have made a home there ever since.
Join the Society to read the Utah Historical Quarterly, attend free virtual events, and get news about the Future Museum of Utah, opening in June 2026. In January 1910, the skilled chocolate makers at the McDonald Candy Company in Salt Lake City went on strike, demanding an 8-hour workday and a flat salary of $10 a week. The Chocolate Dippers Union No. 1 was the first women workers' union in Utah, and although their strike was unsuccessful, women wage workers would win a 9-hour workday from the Utah State Legislature just 1 year later. To see all of what the Utah Historical Society has to offer, take a scroll on their website, history.utah.gov. And then, of course, there's that whole seceding from the United States thing. Which is, by the way, just another historical event that I never heard a single thing about until graduate school, maybe? And even then, just in a fleeting reference in a class that made me go, what? And go home and look it up. The Republic of New Africa was founded by a coalition of Black nationalists after the assassination of Malcolm X.
So Black people, since we have arrived here, have been thinking about formulations of a separate nation. Sometimes that has taken the form of we should leave and go back to Africa. And sometimes people have said, that doesn't feel feasible, but we do have the right to land in space that we have worked here. And instead of trying this integration thing, maybe we should just carve it up, take our piece, and go and establish something over there. Everybody might be happier. And so she believed this with Marcus Garvey. The Communist Party kind of put forth this idea, what they called the Black Belt thesis, the idea that Black people had the right to secede. And then she was a key person that kind of carried it from that kind of 1930s, 1940s moment into the 60s and 70s. She had a group called the Universal Association of Ethiopian Women, a group of middle-aged Black ladies who basically came up with, they called it a draft of an independent Black republic, literally a proto-Declaration of Independence, right? And that was in the late 50s, early 60s, when kind of Black power and the youth movement ramps up. You see a group of young men take that and really move it to its next level with the Republic of New Africa. So after the assassination of Malcolm X, a group of Black nationalists get together in Detroit, and They talk about kind of what are we going to do here? We're kind of at an impasse of integration. Some of our biggest martyrs have died, and Black people don't seem to be getting any further in this integration world. What would it look like if we went forward with some of these plans? And so they have this whole kind of 2-day conference, people milling about. You got folks in suits, you got folks in dashikis. Some people are just coming to see, like, are people really talking about this? And some people are like, we're all in, 500 folks. Next thing you know, they roll out this Declaration of Independence to secede from the United States. And people start shifting in their seats a little bit, right? Because it's one thing to be talking about it. It is, another thing to go up and sign your name on this Declaration of Independence that the feds are watching for and are likely coming after you for, right?
Are you really going to put your name on something this radical, this inflammatory publicly? No, of course you're not. And then,
as the story goes, she lifts up, she says, hallelujah, hallelujah, I've lived to see the day. She feels like she's been promoting this for years. People finally got on her program. And she squiggles her name on it.
Awkward! Everyone now is thoroughly embarrassed. This is a group of largely young, militant Black men who have been too scared to sign this declaration.
And then everybody looks embarrassed because there's this whole kind of grandma at this point willing to risk it all. And they're not. So then all folks line up behind her to sign it.
They secede officially from the United States, declare a new nation.
What are the boundaries of the Republic of New Africa?
Well, they felt that any U.S. states where Black people are the clear majority should probably be governed by Black people. And they declared Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina subjugated national territory of New Africa and commenced organizing a government.
Okay.
They create a president, a vice president, consulate folks, everybody, and they agree to start organizing.
The eventual goal was there should be a referendum of all African Americans in the United States to vote on whether they want to be citizens of the United States. They were never offered a choice of arriving in the United States in the first place, and they were not offered a choice after emancipation of what they wanted to happen.
Eventually, they do buy some land in Jackson, Mississippi, and they set up a fledgling, what we would call a nation. They just got a couple of houses. They integrate people as new citizens. They've got a Pledge of Allegiance. As you can imagine, the U.S. government was not thrilled. And they institute a raid, a shootout and a raid that ends up capturing them. And a group called the RNA 11 are the 11 prisoners that are put on trial for allegedly going after police officers. So after that, the group kind of got mired in trying to get those folks out of jail, and kind of the political projects didn't get off the ground. But one of the things that you still see to this day is that it did spawn all of these kind of shoot-off organizations as those people that were in it kind of moved in different spaces that carried on a lot of Moore's ideals. But there was this brief moment, right, in the late 60s, early 1970s, where this idea was being put into action in its most basic way. And most people don't know that. But also, most people don't realize that a lot of the folks that were the start of it, there's a lot of young men in particular that get credit for it. But they really were kind of sitting at the feet and learning a lot of these things from Queen Mother Moore.
But possibly her most lasting legacy now is the question of reparations.
One thing I will say that showed her particular kind of, prescience or forethought is that in the 50s and 60s is also when she started advocating for reparations. She was organizing in Louisiana when she realized that, in her words, somebody had to pay, not just for the atrocities of slavery, but for the afterlives of which we live. And from about 1958 to about 1965, she went kind of on a speaking tour, trying to get anybody to listen. Church groups, middle-class organizations, Black nationalist organizations, etc. And most people credit her with kind of jump-starting what we would call the modern reparations movement.
She's never like, this is the way we're going to do it. Here's the checklist. She is saying, this is a thing we're going to have to reckon with. This is a question we're going to have to think about. And there's lots of ways that we can think about it and lots of answers we could land in. But first, we have to start actually, honestly addressing the question.
I like that. Instead of saying, I personally have all the answers which the country must adopt. He's saying, let's dare to have the conversations about it.
And that the community at large should be having the conversations. That this shouldn't be a handful of men in a room deciding. This should be a national referendum. This should be a mass-scale conversation and decision.
She also published things that offered different formulations of how this could work. The kind of main question often is, I can believe in this in theory, but how would we actually do that, right? And some of her ideas were far-fetched, some of them were not. But the point here is that she was experimenting and thinking through possibilities of that. And many people kind of grasped onto that. You had kind of more moderate mainstream folks like Charles Ogletree, who is a civil rights lawyer for many years and who actually litigated some of reparations in court in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. He credits her with jumpstarting his understanding and activism in that. And you also have folks that are on the nationalist side that believe that it should be a lump sum in land to think about separating and starting over that way. So we get to the point that we are today. And it is not odd to hear about some sort of legislation, right? Some sort of redistricting, some sort of payment that different states are navigating and thinking about how we might equalize Black life in America. And she is kind of the epicenter of that, talking about that literally more than a half a century ago. And part of why she was able to think through that as well is by the time she's in her 60s and 70s, she's seen as such an important leader in Black America that she was the guest to no less than 7 different presidents or prime ministers in Africa as these different countries were decolonizing.
I mean, the year that they declare the Republic of New Africa is like the peak year that African nations are gaining their independence. Like the 1960s, like, 80% of Africa declares its independence.
And she's there. Literally, she is there in the room when those things are happening.
So she went to Nigeria, she went to Tanzania, she went to Ethiopia. And they're trying to seek her counsel on understanding Black Americans' position and trying to forge these kind of international connections, understanding that now that they have decolonized, this might be an opportunity to court Black people and to organize on a global scale.
But she is also learning from those processes and bringing that information home.
And I think seeing in real time a Black nation come into being makes you feel like that might be possible, and also allows you to kind of think more creatively about the bounds of who you want to be in this place beyond just kind of full integration into America. And so I think she offered a lot of valuable lessons in terms of connecting movement folks here in America with those who were organizing outside of the United States, and also helped people think through, what does it mean to be African American? And is that a useful thing for you to be invested in? As many people know, we hit the 60s and 70s crescendo of kind of activism, and not unlike today, right? There's a backlash, right? Nixon comes to power, Reagan comes to power. And a lot of people feel that many of the gains that the 60s and 70s might have brought are being rolled back, minimized. But at the same time, the 70s and 80s in particular are also when we start to really see the Black middle class. There's a section of Black America who is benefiting from the 60s and 70s activism, but by and large, it's still obviously a tough world. By that point, she is in her later years. She is beset with quite a few health problems, but she is living in New York. And one of the key things that happens in the 90s as inner cities are getting overpoliced and ravished is there's a renaissance in thinking about Black nationalism. And probably the kind of closest touch point for many people listening might be Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie. And you start to see a reinvestment there in being the Nation of Islam, which, Malcolm X was a part of. And she kind of gets a new bidding as a kind of queen or grand dame of the Black nationalist movement. She is still traveling to Africa into the 80s. She slows down after that, but is still also thinking about global liberation. She's still making appearances anywhere and everywhere. I mean, going on speaking tours across the nation, talking about kind of her stump speech, which is reparations, Black self-determination, and separation. Those things she champions well until the end of her life. So she's really moved into, I would say, kind of her queen of the movement, elder of the movement role by the 80s and 90s.
And she's so forward-thinking and progressive, like her politics on almost everything. Except she is very much not where we perhaps now would expect her to be on one pretty major social issue.
Feminism.
She is not a feminist.
Oh, interesting.
In her words.
By today's standards, and really even by late 20th century standards, the gender politics were not great. She had an understanding of a Black nation where a man was the leader and women kind of supported that. That certainly makes sense for somebody born in the 19th century, but it was not where she evolved in a lot of other ways about her thinking. That was not one place where she evolved a lot. And so even well into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, she promoted a very patriarchal understanding of how society and family structures should be organized, while also, right, burning through 3 husbands and being the head of all of her own organizations and never ascribing to all of these politics that she put on other people.
And this is a tale as old as time, right? This has been a thing forever. But what she is saying and what she is doing are 2 very different things.
Fascinating.
We could also look at it more strategically. By the time the 60s and 70s roll around, she is in her 60s and 70s. And organizing, particularly in these kind of more radical movements, is a young man's game. So what better way to kind of endear yourself, right, and not be kind of shoved out of the room? So it's an interesting melange of things. Like I said, she is not practicing what she preaches in any way, form in her own personal life or organizing life. So a generous reason was that it's another tactic, you know. And I would say she's a master tactician, and she had a lot of tactical flexibility. What do I mean by that? So she decided she had a value system that was Black nationalism. Black people should be economically, socially, culturally, politically separate and invested in their own destiny apart from the American nation state. That is her philosophy. But she did not make the sharing of that philosophy contingent on working with you or organizing with you. In fact, she saw it as the opposite, right? Like, I'm going to go to some of these spaces that would never think about that and just maybe sprinkle it in and maybe bring some folks to my side, right? So there's parts of the book that you'll see where she's like amongst like kind of club women in spaces with high-ranking, highly classed elite Black women because of her organizing prowess. She did not see a temporary demand of like entreating upon the government to help Black people as undercutting her larger goals of separation, right? She was able to have that kind of flexibility. And if people were doing good work that were helping alleviate the everyday concerns of Black people, she could get down with that as she was also moving towards this, right? I'm going to come help do this food drive, for example. But while we're there, we're going to talk about, why don't you have food? Why do white people have food, right? What do you think? Who do you think is in charge of not doing this? Why are they invested in you not doing this? So it was a moment to say, oh yeah, somebody does need to pay for doing this. And maybe we don't need to stop depending on them for doing this, right? And so I think that the fact that she appears in spaces that seem quintessentially Black nationalist, but also spaces that could not seem further from, makes her very difficult to categorize as well. And so I think a lot of times you don't know what to do with her. The less generous reading is that this is just what she believed, right?
But even if she thinks she believed it, she certainly didn't act that way. She certainly wasn't walking the walk that she was talking.
Interesting.
It's messy. It's so messy.
It's very much that fascinating issue of hegemony. all these hegemonies are so at play in her life, and she has to decide which one is going to be the most important. So when she's young, class is the thing that really matters. But then when that collapses, she finds her new path through, race. This is how I'm going to be liberated. And then it could become national hegemony if you declare your own nation and you're like, okay, well, this is really what matters. Or go to Africa and this is what matters. And I guess for her, gender was the least important of all the hegemonies, at least based on what she was saying. Or maybe she decided that she needs to say women are submissive, but actually secretly be the kingmaker, like so many women through history.
So many women.
But I think she's a great example of when you disagree with somebody's ideals, or when you see that their words don't match their actions, or, that something about how they see the world really bothers you. If you look at it in terms of hegemony, then you can just be like, oh, I see. Because they think this matters a lot more than this matters. Whereas I think this matters a lot more than that matters. And it helps to make it interesting instead of infuriating.
Yeah. And it's also, it's a pattern that has carried on through the entire interaction between women's rights and race rights throughout U.S. history, that at every point in any of those battles, people who exist in both of them have been asked to choose or to wait, right? Black women in the women's suffrage movement are told, well, yes, but please wait to address that whole race thing until we achieve women's suffrage, even though that won't include you. But once white women get the vote, then we can move on to this and we'll definitely help you focus on it, which of course never happens. And every woman involved in Black liberation or civil rights is told, yes, women's rights are very important, but right now, please, we need you to focus on this. And then once we solve this, then we can address that, right? It is always those competing priorities, and Black women are kind of always asked to wait. And so maybe she just... There are many ways to interpret this, right?
What do you do with somebody like her? She doesn't fit neatly into kind of the periodization of the century because she lived for so long. You don't have a ton of writings, like this corpus of body of work, because I kid you not, she was a poet, but usually scribbled like on the back of a piece of paper in the midst of a protest. She would be called to the mic and just give a speech and just go on. People talked about what a masterful orator she became, just from years of talking to people on the street corners in Harlem. There isn't the kind of set of writings that you can talk about that help understand her political philosophy in a really neat way. And so she doesn't fit a kind of periodization. She doesn't fit a clear kind of triumphant narrative of like working hard to achieve civil rights and liberty and justice for all. She's quite frankly very much against that. And I think it's a really important lesson for today, right? Like, I think a lot of the fights that we see on kind of either side of the aisle is because people have decided that there's one set of ideas or values that they have, and anybody that doesn't hold those, you can't collaborate with, work with, find a middle ground. And I think, again, if we think about the entirety of her life, not just about her politics, but a sort of organizing manual, it shows that. And she also understood sometimes coalitions are brief, right? You might support or join forces, maybe even make strange bedfellows with somebody to one end, and then that breaks apart. And that's okay. And sometimes they're more lasting coalitions. I think when you see how long she had to organize and through how many different periods of, quite frankly, political oppression, you realize how to be inventive and kind of stay the course. And it's by, like I said, just kind of be a master of tactical flexibility.
Why Queen Mother?
Ah, yes. How does she become a Queen Mother?
Yeah.
It is, of course, a predictably messy question.
Oh, interesting.
Great question. It is of a nebulous origin, because let me tell you what, my girl liked to come up with a story. But from what I can tell, she never one to not kind of jump in when somebody needed something. In the late 50s and early 60s, when she was living in Harlem, she found a group of African students who were basically starving. They didn't have enough to eat while they were trying to study in America. So she set up a soup kitchen for them and a place for them to do their homework and kind of a storefront. And they began calling her their Queen Mother as an ode to her kind of mothering impulse, but also particularly in Ghana and the Shante tribe, that's a kind of elderly respect, right?
Do they call her Queen Mother Audley Moore, or do they just call her Queen Mother?
Queen Mother Audley Moore or Queen Mother Moore.
Queen Mother Moore. Good name.
Yeah, wonderful. But then she was literally formally crowned as a Queen Mother on one of her trips to Ghana.
She was formally crowned as a Queen Mother, one of her trips to Africa to Ghana, where the Ashanti tribe did an actual kind of instooling ceremony. But that was in the 70s. So between the 50s and 70s is when she kind of switches into that kind of matron of the movement, mother of the movement role. And then she gets it formalized in the late 70s. And it carries on. Actually, one of her last moments that she wanted to do was actually pass the title on to Winnie Mandela.
Like, they brought Winnie Mandela to Audley Moore's nursing home in Harlem.
Wow.
They had a ceremony, and she officially passed on the title of Queen Mother, which I think really speaks to this is not just a title for Ghana or for the American Black Nationalist movement. This is a global title, right?
Nelson Mandela was president at that point. I bet that was,
Yeah.
hallelujah, she lived to see the day.
It's such a fascinating question. I did want to ask Ashley Farmer what she thought Queen Mother Moore would think about the state of things today.
It's a great question. I think she'd be heartened by the engagement in reparations. I think that when she first started talking about it, she seemed kind of on the fringe, right? I mean, it seemed like a crazy idea. Like, even the word was new to people. It certainly is a part of our vocabulary now as Americans. And you have seen everything from H.R. 40, which was a bill to commission to study reparations that is still not moved forward, put out by John Conyers, who she knew, on up to these maybe more kind of city-level efforts to do repayment in that kind of way. So I think that she'd be heartened in that sense. She would probably say, I told you so. For the rest of it, you know? She was saying many times ago that this is a failed experiment. There is no amount of progress. There is no amount of incremental change. There's no amount of laws that is really going to fully integrate us into the nation state. And if you haven't gotten there by now, perhaps it is that you're not going to. And so I think she would probably say, now is the time to redouble your efforts in thinking more broadly about who you want to be in this space. And I think that she would again galvanize folks to think about other formulations of community and being together. At the heart of what she's talking about, she's saying that nothing has to be the way it is. It's all made up. So you could, if people move with purpose together, you can come up with a different formulation of existing that works better for you. And I think that she would try to encourage people to use what they're seeing now as evidence to push for a broader political imagination. There are moments where that argument, like I said, Black nationalism as a political philosophy has existed as long as African people have been in America. And its popularity ebbs and flows with basically how well America's treating us at the moment. And when it's particularly bad, we move towards that, right? And I think that she's just kind of like this yo-yo back and forth is not really a path because nobody's coming to save you. But I think what's really important in her story, whether you agree with her politics or not, it's a real story about what it takes to stay the course, to stick your compass towards an idea knowing good and well you're probably never going to see that idea come to fruition, and to work tirelessly towards that. And I think no matter what your political affiliation is, there's a lesson about organizing and about how to not lose faith in the midst of what seemed probably like insurmountable obstacles, many of which have kind of come back around for us today.
This has prestige drama miniseries written all over it to me.
And the star-studded cast playing all the famous characters that she's interacting with.
Absolutely.
Come on.
Yes, and I mean, what a beautiful, meaty role for an incredible actress here.
And a completely international story.
Yeah, it ranges all over the world. It crosses the entire 20th century. Or, as Ashley Farmer pointed out, it sure would be wonderful to do The Crown style, multiple decades, new actress for each decade kind of thing.
And that series could ask all the questions and have all the conversations.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much. There's so much material here for so many incredible conversations to be had.
Okay, screenwriters listening, go.
Please, I really would like a series. I would like a series that has her in like her different decades. We should start thinking about a range of Black actresses. We're going to need young, middle-aged, and old actresses. That's what I'm looking for. So let's put that in. Yeah. Limited series. Limited.
And also, just because I'm shallow, the clothes. Imagine the clothes. Huge thanks to our guest, Dr. Ashley Farmer. Visit our website at what'shernamepodcast.com, where you can find links, photos, and more.
You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook, where we post lots of photos each week.
Music for this episode provided by Daniel Henderson and his big band, The New Hot Five, Cynthia Meng and Kim Onah, TrackTribe, Kevin Macleod, and Emmit Fenn.
Our theme song was composed and performed by Daniel Foster Smith.
Our intern is Katie Boucher.
What's Her Name is produced by Olivia Mickle and Katie Nelson, and this episode was edited by Olivia Mickle.